And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird presented by Awesemo.com and also brought to you in part by Yahoo Sports. Check out their DFS offerings and, of course, their fantasy sports offerings overall. Dan Strafford, Dave Lochran with you. And if you ever want to get into bed with Dave Lochran, here's your opportunity as we record live with Dave from the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. Dave, how the hell are you doing?
Gaming Association, huh?
That's what it is, right?
Yeah. No,
What is
you're
it?
right. That's
Yeah,
what you're right. Doing well, man. Doing well. How many games we got? 15?
always.
Ugh. All right.
Always.
Make it happen.
We will, as always. We are going to go through pitching as we often do here. I'm sorry, it's in fact 14 games. There's a 6 o'clock game, I think, on the slate.
Cubs Day game?
We get -1, so we get to talk 14. But we're going to talk pitching mainly, and then we'll talk about stacks on the other side. We have some very good pitchers. Are they in good spots? We will discuss that, and we'll find if there's any cheap options that can give us some upside. We'll look mostly at DraftKings pricing, but I will pull up FanDuel and Yahoo for reference as we roll through, see if there are any bargains for one reason or another on either of those sites. And of course, we have lots of offerings over on Awesemo.com. If you want to be a member, it's early bird as one word for your promo code, 50% off. But we got the MLB strategy show in the morning. You get the deep dive, which is the write-up for MLB during the day. Then you get the deeper dive at 5 p.m. And then you get, of course, live before lock. All of that, all the shows are in front of the paywall. Write-up, projections, lineup builder, ownership projections, and so much more are available behind the paywall at Awesemo.com. Let's dive in, as it were. We have 3 pitchers above 10K with Clevenger and Hamels just below 10K. It's DeGrom, Berrios, and Lance Lynn in Tampa Bay. Talk about Lance Lynn last out of this, just simply because he's been very solid, but somebody that I still have concerns about as we roll on. But DeGrom gets Atlanta in Citi Field. This is an Atlanta team that clearly has some high-powered, potent bats, but DeGrom has shown that he has the upside we saw all of last season. We've seen it a couple of times this year. Last 2 times out has been very solid. Maybe the last 3 times out, really, he's been very solid. And then you have Jose Berrios against the Chicago White Sox. We've talked about their potential for strikeouts. It's not necessarily what it's been in the past, but there is some upside. Berrios clearly one of the more talented pitchers in Major League Baseball. Now, is he as consistent? Probably not, but very solid on the year, 2.84 ERA, 97 strikeouts thus far, and averaging, again, not that this matters, over 20 points per game in DraftKings points. What do we got here, Dave? Berrios, DeGrom, 11-2 and 10-8 respectively. Are they on your radar? And do you think they are top plays here, or do you want to find cheaper options on a 14-game slate?
I think a lot of it's going to come down to what the pricing is. The White Sox strike out a lot more against righties than they do against lefties, though. 24.9% K rate on their active roster versus righties. It's the 4th highest in the league. Meanwhile, their 6.5% walk rate is equally underwhelming. Actually, I believe it's the lowest in the entire league. So really low walk rate, really high K rate versus righties. It is a decent spot. It certainly is. The problem is, how much do you really want to pay for Berrios? I mean, at this rate, I'd honestly rather just take Jacob deGrom. I get that it's not a perfect spot for him, but it's also a spot that he just went out and dropped 8 in the 3rd innings with 10 Ks and 35 fantasy points. I mean, when right, Jacob deGrom is one of the best pitchers, one of the best fantasy pitchers in the entire game. He's a strikeout monster. So as much as I like Berrios as a pitcher, I just don't think I can get to him ahead of a guy like Jacob deGrom. Even though deGrom's got a less appealing matchup, he's a better, more reliable, more consistent arm. He's got the home matchup at Citi Field. I really like that. And Lance Lynn's been very good this year. I take nothing away from him. But again, I just don't trust him as much as I trust deGrom. And while the Rays will strike out at a decent clip, I think they're against righties, not as much against lefties, but they'll strike out at a decent clip. They're just not a great matchup, though. They really aren't. They have a 112 WRC plus, 193 ISO, 335 WOBA. All of those are above average marks for an offense this season versus righties. And then with Cole Hamels, here's another one where, Cole Hamels is having a somewhat of a resurgence a resurgent season with some really big games, one in Coors, one in St. Louis, one against the White Sox. He's been fantastic. But I just don't see the strikeout upside here against a Cincinnati team that may be underwhelming from a run-scoring standpoint, but they don't strike out enough for Hamels, in my opinion, to be worth the money, which is why I keep going back to DeGrom. Now, the other guy that fascinates me is Mike Clevenger. His first start back, he threw 4 2/3 innings. He gave up 5 runs to Texas, in Texas, of course. It's a very tough matchup, very tough part, with 7 strikeouts. He struck out 7 in 20 batters faced, so he's striking out more than 33% of batters faced, which is what you want to see. Now you got him against Baltimore, against the Orioles, in a much, much more appealing matchup. I think Clevenger's a guy that I'd be willing to take a stab at. The pitch count is definitely something worth considering, but not really. He threw 91 pitches last time. My guess is that he'll be able to go as long as he needs to go.
Yep.
DeGrom and Clevenger would be the 2 guys that I like most up top.
Yep, I think that makes a ton of sense. I will admit my personal bias against Lance Lynn. There's 19.7% K- walk ratio. He has K per 9 of 9.72. His xFIP is lower than his ERA at 4.32 to 3.88 respectively. So there's tons to like and maybe even respect here for Lynn. But this is just not a matchup that I love against the Rays. And yes, it's in a hitter's park. In a pitcher's park. But the Rays are sub or just right at the average on the year, as you're saying, with Ks against righties, 22.6%, 8.1% walk ratio. I will stay far away from Lynn at 10K plus. I like DeGrom. Barrios is fine to me, but if I'm going to go that expensive, the 400 more, I'll get to DeGrom. But Clevenger stands out. And I think we all have to admit that Baltimore is not that bad in offense, not as bad as they were the first couple of weeks of the season.
Righties, though, man.
Yeah, agree. But it's also just a situation of these top matchups. Orioles at 24.1% K percentage, 7.7 walk, and you pointed out we're talking WRC plus. They're at 85 against righties on the season. So Clevenger makes a ton of sense at 9.6. Now the question is there someone else for tournaments where we can get some extra salary that we can pair Clevenger with, or 2 cheap arms that at least we're somewhat comfortable with that gives us the most upside? And I think there are some names here that are going to be at least tempting that might give us some upside as we roll through. Our good friend Wade Miley is at 8,600. Soroka is at 93. Merrill Kelly is at 9,100 on this game. He has strung together 3, 4, 5 out of 6 really solid outings. Last time out, had 9 Ks. Time before that, against Colorado, struggled a little bit, but really just didn't have it from the hit department. We kind of whipped and then gave up 5 runs, but wasn't absolutely decimated in that contest. Only gave up 1 home run, and he's been pretty good with the walks. 1.26 whip. He just gives up a lot of contact. He's in San Francisco, though, Dave, and that's why his price point is up. He's facing a Giants lineup that we've talked about many times over as how much they struggle, and there's not too much to be concerned about. Is Merrill Kelly at 9,100 anywhere on your radar?
Not at that price, no. Sometimes you just got to roll with talent, and I think Clevenger's more talented. Soroka is also more talented. I mean, the strikeouts for Soroka have been pretty brutal in some spots, but he's also the type of guy that can go out there and go deep into games. The Mets have just been in complete and utter disarray. It's been brutal for them right now. They just lost 4 straight to a Philly team that just lost 6 straight and 3 straight to the Marlins. So that'll give you an idea how bad the Mets have been.
Edwin Diaz gave up, 5 runs?
5 runs, man. He gave up a 2-run shot to Maikel Franco, then a 3-run shot to walk it off for Gene Segura. I mean, I almost felt bad for the guys, and I'm a massive Phillies fan. I mean, the Phillies came from behind, I think, in all 4 games, 2 of them consecutively in the 9th inning. It's just a brutal way to lose baseball games. They're in disarray. Soroka, I would take not over Clevenger, but probably over Kelly. The thing with Kelly is he has been good. It's not – I take nothing away from him. But at that price point, man, against a team that isn't good, but also doesn't have a wicked high strikeout rate. I mean, I think when you start to look at some of these numbers, you say, all right, Merrill Kelly's not bad. But is he worth paying a premium for? For me, that's what kind of makes it difficult. I don't know if he's worth getting there. Well, quickly, he has a 9.5% swinging strike rate, which is, pedestrian at best. A 4.5 xFIP. Like, the numbers are okay. They're just nothing that stand out to me.
To that point, Kelly on the year is at a 12.7 K minus walk ratio, striking out just 19.6% of batters. And this is overall. And then you look at San Francisco against right-handers, and they are, what are they, sub 23? They're 22.2%. Yes, WRC plus of 86. Like, what's that?
So what's that, like 17th or 18th or something?
Yeah, exactly right. So it's just the K upside isn't there on this slate. And again, to your point, Lofty, I think you chase the strikeouts with Clevenger at a $500 markup when it makes sense. You get Ryu in Colorado. I mentioned Wade Miley. Yanni Trinos is at 8,400. Amazing to see. I didn't even know how many starts he's been making. Has he been? Let's see. Sean Reed Foley. He's been in the bullpen, right? Yeah, he's been spot starter, been at AAA. He is 8,300 here for the Blue Jays against the Kansas City Royals. Then you have Mike Fiers against the Angels, Sonny Gray against Chicago, Tommy Malone, Anibal Sanchez. And we get down to Danny Duffy on the other side of that Toronto matchup. Any of those names on your radar? Anybody here in this mid, 8,600 down to 7K or so area makes sense? Or I guess we can talk a little Vince Velasquez here with some upside against Miami. But what do you got here in the mid tier?
I do think Ryu is relatively interesting. Like, if no one's going to play him, the Rockies from the right side of the plate are not stacked, but Trevor Story being out only adds to that problem. So yeah, you've got Nolan Arenado. That's one of your righties, and then you start getting into a bunch of guys that are hardly concerning you at all. Brandon Rogers is on the IL. Not sure if that's good for opposing pitchers. Who else is there? Desmond, Ionetta. These guys are not going to scare you whatsoever. I mean, at all. Maybe you put Mark Reynolds and start Mark Reynolds, but he's been god-awful, and he's also struck out 48 times in 118 plate appearances. So I don't think, outside of Arenado, this is a terrible matchup, especially from a platoon advantage standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised if Ryu faces another 4 or 5 lefties. So, yeah, it's Coors Field, and that obviously takes some shine off of any pitcher. But I'm not necessarily stepping away from Ryu here. He's just been so remarkably consistent this year. He's striking out less than a batter per inning, but still has decent enough K rates. I think this is a spot where you could take a risk.
Check out the ownership projections, as always, over on Osmo.com. Upload in the morning and then updated throughout the day. Don't take that first run as gospel. Check back early and often, especially as lineups come out throughout the early afternoon and evening, depending on where you are throughout the U.S. What else here? You got can't like Sonny Gray. Don't think he can like Tommy Malone. Anibal Sanchez against Detroit or Vince Velasquez against Miami. Either of those two on your radar?
Yeah, Sonny Gray to me is somewhat interesting, only because he's really cheap, and he's been pretty good this season. So if I can play the talent, even if it's not in the greatest matchup or greatest part, I'm not totally opposed to it. If you're playing 150 lineups and you were to get some Sonny Gray in there, to me, it actually does make some sense. I mean, Sonny Gray has – you look at his strikeout stuff this season, let's see, 26.7% strikeout rate against lefties, 31.5. And he's been punching lefties out at a really high clip this season. He's got 30% called plus swinging strike rate. He's going to face a fair amount of lefties. It's obviously a scary, risky spot. The Cubs will probably have a relatively high total. But 77 on Gray is not a wild idea. I mean, I'd play him over Reed Foley. I'd play him over Fiers. I'd play him over an expensive Chirinos against Texas. I think Wade Miley's interesting if there's 5 lefties in the lineup, but that's yet to be seen. Tommy Malone against Houston. It's really tough. Outside of that, you get down to like Aaron or Anibal Sanchez and just hope that he can continue to punch out decent enough numbers here. Just keep striking out, 23, 24% of batters and take it to a Detroit team that has the second highest K rate versus righties on the season.
We were talking before about how many games they're on the slate, and they're 14. It looks like the Red Sox aren't on this slate, but I don't think they have an early game, though, either. It's one of the stranger things I've seen in a while.
Wait, then are there 13 games?
No, there are 14 games. The first game is a 7 o'clock game, 7:05. So there are 14 games with no early game from what I am reading.
Oh, I thought you said there was a 6 p.m. game.
I thought there was. I just assumed because there are 14 games that we would have one early game, but it looks like the Red Sox and one other team are not on a Friday slate, which is very odd.
They've done that once in a while this season. It's very strange, and I don't remember them ever doing that in seasons before.
Yeah, I don't know, but we'll try to figure that all out. Let's continue on here. I am a card-carrying member of the Sonny Gray fan club, so I have no problem talking about – what was that?
Not the NRA?
No. Two slightly different organizations.
What a peg.
Sonny Gray against Chicago would be probably a bridge too far for me simply because of the power and the park. But I do think, again, when we mention a lot of this, when you're talking about 150 lineups, you're mass multi-entering, or you're trying to get
over here, Dan.
If you're trying to get a little bit different. Gray may be pretty low on the ownership pedestal on Friday's slate. And then you mentioned Sanchez. There's Sanchez against Detroit, which has its own problems. The Tigers on the year, 25.9% K percentage. All numbers we've talked about many times over, mentioned here on the podcast, 155 ISO, 79 WRC+. Again, it's another pitcher that I have personal biases against when it comes to someone like Anibal Sanchez, but there is clear upside there. And don't know if we've touched on the season, what have you seen as a Phillies fan from Vince Velasquez? Is there anything here to think that he can return to sort of that K upside we saw over the course of the season, or is he just injuries and not really figuring it out here in 2019?
I'll tell you what I've seen. A lot of home runs.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly crazy. It's the Marlins. Anybody can go out there and put up respectable enough numbers against against the Miami Marlins. We see it happen far too often where they just are terrible. It's a bad team. Look, as far as where this Marlins team ranks against righties, they are so bad in every single department. Just look up and down everywhere. They're terrible. They have a 126 ISO. A 126 ISO. Just absolute heinous garbage. It is the worst in the league. 29th is 153. Think about that. 153 is 29th. 126 is 30th. They also have no speed on the base paths. It's tough, but Vince Velasquez threw 5 innings his last time out with 1 run on a solo shot, 5 strikeouts, and you know who that came against? The Miami Marlins. So, no, I actually think at this price point, I'm happy to roster him. But if he's chalk, I have interest in Chris Archer. It's super risky. It's at Miller Park. It's not fun. But there are strikeouts in this lineup. And you're now talking about a Brewers team that ranks on their active roster. They have the 5th highest K rate in the league. They will strike out.
Yep.
They will hit for power. They will draw walks.
I will say, though, Dave, Travis Shaw has been designated for assignment, and Keston Hiura is being recalled. Not that he is the end-all, be-all, but Travis Shaw has been striking out, I think, at some sort of insane clip on the year.
Yeah,
so.
32%. He's been a strikeout. It's been a beautiful thing. But still one of the higher strikeouts, when you take their active roster as a whole. I just think Archer will be way less popular than somebody like Vince Velasquez. So it doesn't seem like the craziest idea to give him some consideration in tournaments.
All right, let's continue on here. You mentioned Archer, Velasquez is down here. Means against The Cleveland Indians is at 6,800. He'll be activated before this start. Had some shoulder issues. Never like to see that from a starting pitcher, but he has a matchup here with Cleveland. And then you have the Eliezer Hernandez, Sean Anderson, Lauer, Waka is against San Diego at 5,900. Daniel Norris at 5,700. I'll say this. There are some names down here that we have used in the past. That is not in any way indicative of skill set or what they have to offer on Friday night. But there's Lauer, there's Waka, Daniel Norris. Maybe that's my own problem. I've rostered a few times in the past. Any of these really cheap options on a core slate, on a slate where we're trying to get up for bats, as we always do on DK, are any of these sub 7K options at least potentially 10 to 14 DraftKings points to give us enough to roster the bats we want to roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think Waka would be in play. It's been a really ugly season for him, but if there's one thing we know about Waka is he's just significantly worse against lefties than he is against righties. And I think he's going to face a good amount of righties today. Not only that, but the majority of power on this San Diego team comes from the right side of the plate. So it's not an insane idea. The crazy thing is he has what's his K rate against righties? 18%. Like it's been rough. This whole season for him has been really rough, but historically Michael Wacha has been so much better against righties than lefties. And you have to think that we see a little bit of positive regression here. So, yeah, Wacha, I don't like it. I'd rather get up to Velasquez, maybe even Archer there, but it's not crazy. Alicia Hernandez is striking batters out, which at that price point is decent enough. Tough matchup, though, disciplined Philly team that's going to draw a lot of walks. And then, I guess if you're really desperate, Sean Anderson against Arizona at Oracle. He's very cheap. He's been okay this season. He just isn't getting the strikeouts. So low strikeout matchup, low strikeout pitcher, a little bit concerning there. Aside from that, though, I'm not going to Ulyss Chassin, Senzatella, Norris. The Washington Nationals are a good team against lefties. They can run out just a slew of power-packed righties, and I'll stay away from that. So at the bottom, yeah, it's kind of ugly. I guess the only other one would possibly be Eric Lauer, but that's just pissing in the wind. You're just hoping that it doesn't go terribly wrong because you know what? Eric Lauer, for the most part this season, has been pretty consistent. So, yeah, if you're playing a single entry, I don't think you – or like cash games, I don't think you want to go past Velasquez. But if you're MMing, I think Lauer, Waka, Anderson, Hernandez, all of them have some utility just because of their pricing.
Right. I think that is always the point we try to make, that if you're playing a single lineup, you're playing cash games, you're even playing the three maxes, some of these names down at the bottom are not going to give you the floor that you're looking for to be consistent and give you at least a jumping off point. But if you're playing multiple lineups and you're using a site like Fantasy Cruncher or others, you're going to get mix and matches of some of these lower end pitchers if you're trying to stack up some of the bats. And that's something I will point out, and it's in obviously a very limited sample size, but Sean Reed-Foley has a 0 K-minus walk ratio on the year. A 0 K-minus walk. Now, what's even better about that is that's in, I think, like 10 innings of work, or maybe even less than that. Antonio Senzatella has a 3.2% K-minus walk ratio on the year, and that is in a much larger sample size. So take that for what it's worth on this slate, but we'll go through and talk about some of the top stacks that Dave is looking at. Reminder again, the deep dive is the written work that comes out on Friday. You get right up on all the pitchers, and then a behind the paywall cheat sheet of top offensive plays there. Are you writing, or is Adam writing on Friday?
No, I'm going to do it.
Okay, so you get Lofty's right up on Friday, and then you get the deep dive at 5 p.m. and live before lock following that, obviously before lock comes. Let's dive into some of these offenses. Pretty clear cut where we may go first, which is the Dodgers against Senzatella. All the bats, all of them. Forget lefty righty, forget any of it. You should see. Do you have a run total for the Dodgers and Colorado Rockies here? I assume
6.9 for the Dodgers.
It feels low now. I feel like now that we've breached 7 runs, like that we've gotten that number a few times.
I feel like the Rockies always get that little home field advantage boost in the odds, right? So, like, if they were against Senzatella, I bet it would be 7-2 or so.
I mean, that makes sense. So yeah, the home team gets the bigger boost on the biggest odds.
It makes I like. I mean, obviously the Dodgers here are your top stack, but I really like Washington against Daniel Norris. It's a pretty appealing spot, and they just have a lot of bats here from the right side that can do damage and can get stolen bases. Another one to consider. Not necessarily sure how popular they're going to be, but where am I? Sorry. But Milwaukee against Archer, I talked about having some interest in Archer, and I still do. But he's also had some serious homer-prone issues this year, 18 home runs in 13 starts. This guy allowed 5 home runs in a start just a month or less than a month ago, 4 of them in an inning. Obviously, that inflates his home run totals, but I don't know if he has a start this season where he hasn't allowed a home run. And there's just so much power from the top to bottom in this Milwaukee lineup that, to me, they're very interesting. Both sides of this game are very interesting. Probably look to go heavier on the side with the lower ownership. Cleveland against Means is fine. I don't necessarily love them just because they have a high total. The high total doesn't do everything for me. Toronto will probably be a cheap stack against Duffy. Not in love with that. The ones that I mentioned up top, though, the Dodgers, Nats, and Brewers right now are probably going to be my favorite. And then Houston against Tommy Malone, I'm hoping that they go relatively overlooked. That could end up being a really good spot with a ton of righties against the lefty who has been pretty lucky thus far since rejoining the majors.
I'm right there with you. I know Malone, as you said, has counting stats that show he's been pretty good, but an Astros lineup with a 135 WRC plus against lefties. This is with the active roster, 17.8% K rate with a 12% walk ratio. So there's not a ton there to play with. And ISO, I think around 229. No, that's gotta be wrong, right? No, that's right. 229 for the Astros. Now this is limited. Their active roster has not been together much, but you do have Springer back there as well. Love the Astros, and we'll say that I'd love to find a way to like the Mariners here. They do strike out a ton against lefties, and they have been so bad since that early run that their offense was on. They're looking to get rid of every piece possible when it comes to this offense. So I'd love to go against Wade Miley here, but I don't see the Mariners having that much upside. But I will say this as we conclude or come to the conclusion of the podcast. You're going to, on this biggest slate, just want to pay attention to ownership percentages. It's not going to be that huge a difference in these starting pitchers, but when you find a star who you think is in a spot for a blow up and you see that the opposing offense is going to be low owned or that star is going to be high owned, leverage that. Use that for your advantage and try to get into thinking differently about how ownership affects your lineup construction, even for you building 1 or 2 lineups. I do it. I want to make sure I at least acknowledge ownership and see where I can get a little bit different. If I have players projected at the same total and I say, one's going to be owned at 30%, one at 10%, that's a pretty easy decision when you're constructing your lineup. So don't just ignore it because you're building 1 or 2 lineups. It's not just for those building MMEs. Anybody else, any other offenses or one-offs that, first blush here, first glance stands out, or ready to dive into building out the player pool that you're going to write about in the deep dive?
Yeah, that's probably going to move on to that. I guess last thing I'd mention is Miami against Velasquez. It's obviously risky. It's not a spot that anyone's going to go to, but there's a very good chance that Velasquez, even on a 14-game slate, is uber chalk. And this game's in Miami, so it helps him. I wish it was in Philly. But, man, he's just been so difficult to trust. I mean, if he's coming in at like 40%, at least consider trying to do something different because even a good game from Velasquez, I have a difficult time believing that it's going to be that high enough upside game where if you don't have him, you're just devastated. In cash, obviously, it's the play and single entries, yeah, but diversifying here isn't crazy if he's going to be as popular as he is.
2.11 home runs per 9 on the year for Vince Velasquez. That is not a good number. So to Dave's point, if he's high owned, or even if he's not, if you just want to get 1 or 2 Marlins in your lineup, I know that.
It doesn't even have to be the Marlins, just in general, like maybe find something different to do. Sure,
from a pitching perspective.
Yeah, Velasquez is that chalky because I I like him here, but I would be anyone would be lying if they said, "Oh yeah, I'm totally confident in him." You
Right.
can't.
Makes total sense to me. Find Dave on Twitter at Lofty_D, LOUGHY_D. Find me at Dan Stratford. Of course, it's at Osmo_com. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's me and Dave here on the DFS Early Bird. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you get EMAC and Adam. That's Adam. Ship my money. DFS share, as EMAC loves to point out each and every time he introduces them. But nonetheless, I love EMAC. I miss you, EMAC. We need to host another Saturday show so people can call us old in YouTube chat. That was fantastic. Anyway, with that said, best of luck on this Friday slate. You get EMAC and Adam Saturday morning on the DFS Early Bird, presented by Osmo.com.